It is a delight to be here today and to be able to welcome all of you to Omaha. You honor us with your presence and with your interest. We realize that we have, through a tremendous cumulative effort, become a community of some amount of interest to others, especially, I'm going to set this down, especially to those that are communities of size similar to Omaha and Lexington. There's a whole band of us that are out here, but that seem to, we always say that people forget that there is anything between Chicago and Sacramento. We have fought that for a long time. Kevin Costner once on the Johnny Carson show described Nebraska after he'd been here, and now he comes every year for the College World Series, I might add. But after he'd been here, he said he had no idea what Nebraska was like and what Omaha was like. He said, I always thought it was a meal and a movie, LAX to JFK. And he said, but all I used to see are those big green circles down there. So we all have identity issues, and I think a lot of it is how we attack it. We used to be called, we were the Echo City, Omaha, Omaha? People would say, or Omaha, ha, ha, was another joke. Or, oh yes, I was in Omaha once. Isn't that under the crack in the middle of the road atlas? And another one always was, oh, Nebraska, I drove across the state once. It was the longest year of my life. And so we've had a little bit of a collective inferiority complex. And coupled with Midwestern modesty, that's been quite a bit to overcome. But I am pleased to tell you that we have made a tremendous amount of progress on all of those things, not to mention on our community development through the years. I was the one child in my family. I'm a fifth generation resident of Douglas County, Nebraska. And I was the one kid who knew from the time I was 9 in the 3rd grade, I was not going to end up in Omaha. I am the only child in my family who is still here. I'm the one of 2 out of all my cousins who are still here. We've had a huge brain drain issue. Maybe you have the same thing. Maybe that says my sisters are brainier than I. That's true, and they're not as tall as I am either. But in any way, I'm here due to a set of circumstances, and I made the right decision after having my little book of 5-year plans that I would revise every year, like the Russians. And now I want to see how the movie ends. And I'm proud to be in Omaha, and I am delighted that I've had a seat, as I like to call it, in the engine room all of these years while working for the Peter Kiewit Foundation. I was asked when, after Alan and Linda and I spent some amount of time on the phone, I was asked to talk a little bit about how I started telling them that what the metaphor I often use for what we're talking about here today is a one-word lecture that my mother used to give my sisters and me. It came when you were trying to clean the room or mow the lawn or whatever, and she'd say, start. It's a one-word lecture, start. I don't care if you start at the end or the beginning or the middle, but start. And that's what Omaha did when we started ginning up this renaissance that we have now experienced. And it's what I'd like to do today. I don't know if I'm starting in the beginning, the middle, or the end to talk about the topics that are on the table during this visit, but I am going to start. And the other thing is, this is not what we did and what any city can do. It is not rocket science. There are not magic floorboards where there are the answers hidden, that sort of a thing. It largely goes to the personality of the people and the desire of the town. About 2 years ago, when we were in the depths of this economic depression, I got a call from the Wall Street Journal, and they said, what are you people doing out there? So you have to realize we still have to work on that little reporter who was sitting back in New York. But I said, what do you mean, you people out there? And he said, haven't you noticed that all of the states on any economic map are red right now, except for that center spine from North Dakota to Oklahoma? What are you people doing? And I said, well, I don't think we're doing anything any different than we've ever done. we work hard, we don't spend everything we have, and we help one another. There was this long pause, and he said, "That's it?" And I said, "That's it. That's pretty much it." And I've tested that out a lot of times since, and I stand by it. And I would say that from the person who has the below minimum wage job up to Warren Buffett. That is true out here in this place. And that is what has probably served us the best as we've done all these community things. So where did Omaha start? When we were trying to get back on track and move up, it was in the doldrums of the 80s economy, and where we were suffering, not only was the national economy bad, but what had happened here to us locally with deregulation, some of our biggest philanthropic companies had been deregulated, and they were just tumbling for their budgets and their funding. They had been some of our biggest donors. We had a ton of utilities here, railroads, banking, insurance companies, and they were awash with cash, and that cash would automatically, and my entire life, I don't remember not seeing those names on absolutely everything that would go on in Omaha. So all of a sudden, we have that downturn. We had bumpy government leadership, including one of my law school classmates who was recalled from the mayor. His successor died 6 months later, and then the third one, stand-in, another law school classmate of mine, fled the country because of felonious behavior. And so we had a tough time politically and with government leadership, and then we had the ag crisis in the 80s. But we also had a really good base. We have a strong sense of community identity. We are a highly affiliated community religiously, and we're very ecumenical. We are 54% Roman Catholic. That is a conservative number. I am not Roman Catholic, but I can tell you truly, the map of Omaha in my brain is Catholic parishes. Because when somebody tells me she grew up in Our Lady of Lourdes, bang, I can peg that. And then I can relate with, well, then you knew the so-and-so family and you knew the so-and-so. And that's a lot about what Omaha is. It's recognizing what those connections are and then discussing them and exchanging them and using that, building credibility, trust, familiarity. And the other thing I think is cool, and I don't think I appreciated this when I was younger, but that arcs between the chairman of the board of some of the companies here and again to the lower than minimum wage people. They take each other's calls. It really works, and it is that fundamental ground level, genuine exchange of people. We are highly networked, as I said. Some people call us a high school town because within 3 questions, when you meet someone and you find out you're both from Omaha, the question is, where'd you go to high school? And that is not a status thing. It's not an economic quiz. It is for the same reasons I just described. We have always had a good sense of need and opportunity. We have been blessed, as you've heard, I'm sure, many times with these major Fortune 50 companies that are based here and show every indication of staying. And the other thing that takes you back to my little quote to the Wall Street Journal is we benefit, as I would think Lexington does also, from the pioneer tradition. That is really in us here. We're kind of where the West begins. And that whole history of pioneers, you helped your neighbor no matter who your neighbor was. And we see that over and over again in Omaha. But I think because we took it for granted, we weren't capitalizing on it. What we have developed, I think, is a state of mind, and it's one of candor and transparency with one another. We have great respect for the past. We know we're standing on the shoulders of some amazing people, including the man I work for, Peter Kiewit, who died in 1979. But there are those who would say that Mr. Kiewit casts a longer shadow today than he did in his lifetime, although he was quite a philanthropist then too. But we recognize the past contributions to the community, what they did, the progress they made possible. We also realize some of the problems that those good intentions created and that we have struggled to maybe bring up to contemporary standards or contemporary lifestyle. But all of us, whether you're in Lexington or we are here in Nebraska, are the trustees of the past and the future. And when you're talking about philanthropy or you're talking about a business, you're thinking about all those things that we pass on, that the philanthropy our ancestors did. Today we enjoy their universities, the parks, the libraries, the museums, all those kinds of things they created. And so that's incumbent upon us to take care of those for the next generation. But we also have to be creating and updating and revitalizing not only those things, but all the other things that have developed since. I like to describe effective philanthropy, and that adjective is huge. You know, anybody, I could stand here and throw money out across the room. Somebody's going to catch it and walk away with it, and you could call that philanthropy. The key to it is the adjective effective philanthropy. And those are thoughtful gifts of present value that will go on giving and giving. And I talk about it as being stacked value. It's not only, it's recognizing the past, it is assessing what the present is, and then making a decision about what you do today and factoring that forward, what that can be in 20 years or however much longer. All of us are really the architects, even though we don't have degrees in architecture, of the community character. And here we've tried to blend that. You've probably heard a lot of people already talk about public-private partnerships, but blending elected officials, not the one who fled to South America, but everyone else. The business community, charities, our nonprofits. We have one of the most outstanding and productive United Ways in the nation. Teachers, judges, clergy, philanthropists, and by all means our universities and colleges. Those two are real economic engines for you. In turn, all of us on that team of architects are designing and are responsible for the image of and the functionality of humanity, hospitality, the economic vibrance, social priorities, the grandeur of a community, and the livability of it. So all of that said is kind of the look from 20,000 feet above. Here we go back to Wilma's lecture of START. These are not in any particular order, but if I were giving advice to a community on how to effectively interact with philanthropy, to promote it, to develop it, engage it, enable it, these are the points that I would make to you. First, know your history, that which is seen and unseen, and then use a real clear lens of reality. Sometimes that's hard, but get out the Windex, and you have to have a clean lens to see where you are today, but remember what you have in your past. And use your collective memory. When I was talking about how we weave here in Omaha, that's extremely important, is what is your collective memory and your collective history. If you are cut into segments or you see your town and you're able to analyze what that segment is, I would argue that you look at that and how do you build bridges. You don't want to destroy those segments, but you have to look at how do you open the side doors and how do you get the air and the light moving. And you also have to blend the constituencies. The United Way is strong because our community, our corporate community is strong, and vice versa. Our corporate community attracts and retains some of the employees that they are able to do because of our rich nonprofit community, which results in a higher quality of life. So what's success look like? It's what fits. It's not what we're reading about that worked somewhere else and we read about it in Forbes or the Sunday Times or Inc. It's what fits in your community. What is consistent with what you are, what you have, who your people are. What's the right size for you to aspire to? And where is your element of inclusivity? I would tell you that's something Omaha still struggles with. We struggle with race inclusivity, and we struggle with gender. We're very unbalanced on the faces that you would see in a room of decision makers. But I think we compensate for that because of a factor of high civility and high awareness of this incorporating all types. And then the hugest issue when you're looking anymore, and we've used this word consistently in all these things in Omaha, is sustainability. If you create the monster, who is going to feed it? You always have to be looking at forward as to what that sustainability issue is. So the stereotype formula for success, that's not authentic. And if it isn't authentic to Lexington, it isn't going to work in Lexington. You're not going to have the right kind of support going forward. You're probably not going to be able to sustain it. You could end up with a giant flop in the middle of your community, and it's going to suck a tremendous amount of energy, attention, and resource to fix it. And if it can't ever be fixed, it's going to be that constant kind of a drain. So what is success going to look like for you? And years ago, I told you, when we were just down in the dumps in the early 80s, we paired up with the Nebraska Press Association, because there's a newspaper, was in those days in almost every town. And we and the Omaha World Herald largely went town by town and conducted these town hall meetings off of a curriculum that we hadn't designed, and we weren't facilitating. And once the town folks were there, they were kind of on their own to decide and discuss all these things. And it was an amazing process. And the way it was described is building scenarios. Look at what got you to where you were at that night or that day at that meeting. What was that scenario? Build the healthy scenario for where you want your town to go, and recognize what the scenario is going to be if you don't change anything. And then how are you going to cope with those? How are you going to make those kinds of opportunities? And I'll tell you, I can drive around the state to this day. I can see the towns that did that, and I can see those who just stayed on the flat. So design that scenario, healthy versus unhealthy, and the path from the past to where you are here, and then looking at where you want to go from there. You know, we've just had the whole Warren Buffett Burke stock, we call it here, this last weekend. We locals kind of go and hide at home, and lots of visitors come, thousands, to our city. But I often use Warren's 20-year assessment, because not only does it get everybody's attention because they think, oh, Warren, maybe I'll get some of that stock, but Warren will say to you, I'm not making decisions today for the investments I'm going to buy next week or next year. Today, I am reaping the benefits of those investments I bought 10, 15, 20 years ago. Today, I'm looking and I'm analyzing where society's going, what society's going to need, where people's needs will be in 5, 10, 15 years, and that's what I'm buying today. And I think coupling that scenario on a small local scale with something like what Warren is doing with a global impact, there obviously, I think there's something there. You have the power to choose for your community, but I think that's really hard, because you have to find where your consensus is. And you have to be able to be candid enough with one another, and you have to let your own defenses down. And that took some time for us with some people, and some people never got there with us as donors on some of these projects. And they are still not players, and some have run to catch up, but they're still not players, and it's been, and some of them would admit to you, to their detriment. You also have to, in this start lecture, carefully and quickly assess what these shifting sands of culture are. It's moving at warp speed. And if we're moving at warp speed here in Omaha, we know you are in Lexington as well. Here the trends get to us a little later than otherwise, but because we have a tremendous high-tech, not only business going for us, but we have an infrastructure that once again was started some 30 years ago. And we are still benefiting from that. And what located in Omaha and Nebraska back then to take advantage of that, and why we've been able to nurture that and build upon that and expand some of those very contemporary and futuristic things. But it's a huge mistake if we're not all looking at what is rapidly changing. I would say assess your strengths your assets and your weaknesses, and it's so hard to be honest. I always tell people that I'm mentoring, go stand in front of the mirror when you get up in the morning. Ask yourself the tough questions, and then force yourself to answer them. That doesn't happen in one day. When I did it, it took about 8 months, I think, when I did it personally. But to this day, I can still hear those questions and those answers in my head. So do that for your town. Ask yourself the hard questions, force yourself to answer them. Assess those strengths, assets, and weaknesses. If there is an elephant in the room, introduce it. That is something that we don't always do here because of a lot of reasons, whether it's an abstract elephant or a real elephant. And I would say from our experience, I would definitely do that. If you have an elephant, introduce it. And then assess and analyze and critique your communication patterns and your practice. You can always change those. That may be one of the easiest things to change, and certainly is in the digital world. But assess, where are your gaps in that? And if your community is segmented or ill-informed or unmotivated, you can use communication systems to change that pretty quickly. And then after you've done those things, I suggest that you, as one of my friends who does a lot of civic work, she says, go to the balcony. Get yourself to the balcony so that you can get that bird's eye view and start seeing where all these pieces are, what is moving, what isn't moving, what's positive and advancing, what isn't, what's holding you back. That balcony view, you're not so high that you're disconnected, but you're at the balcony and you can look out on that. And then the other term that I used with Linda and Alan was a potluck supper. Now maybe you have a different name for that in the South. But here, we do potluck suppers, and that means everybody brings what they can bring to the meal, and then you have a buffet. Think about that when you think about your community. Use the metaphor of a potluck supper, because everybody can bring something to the table. Everybody can be a philanthropist. Time, talent, treasure, any combination of those three. So make it a potluck supper and let everybody know that they're welcome to come, and that they can not only enjoy the buffet once it gets served, but they're going to be there because they have also brought what they had in their talent. Philanthropy is just one of those things. You'll get some philanthropists that come there, and some of the philanthropists I know will bring the least amount of food, or they will bring the cheapest food, or God forbid something that they made. But in any case, everybody brings what they can. And then the next thing in this lecture of START is find common ground on something. Something. No, and that can get pretty tough sometimes, but maybe it's a common eyesore that everybody in town groans every time they drive by it. Maybe it's a fun tradition to exploit. You all have plenty of those. You have more of those than we do. But it helps you build your identity, build your esprit de corps, and it gets everybody focusing together. Maybe it's doing that one read, Lexington Reads, where everybody reads the same book. Lots of communities have been doing that. And so no matter who you're sitting next to on a bus stop or standing in the grocery line with, everybody's just finished reading To Kill a Mockingbird. And so you're talking about who was Boo Radley and what did he symbolize, you know? And you get the town, again, weaving themselves. In our case, if you came in from the airport on the boulevard that came in called Abbott Drive with all the trees and the lights, that used to be junkyard after junkyard after junkyard. That was the first thing you saw when you came to Omaha and the last thing when you left. We got tired of looking at that, and so we hired an internationally famous landscape architecture firm to come and design what you now see. And that was a gift to the city. And I would tell you without any braggadocio, I think, as a hometown girl, that was the first thing that started to change the way we felt about ourselves, started to change that collective inferiority complex of apologizing for Omaha all the time. I just read not long ago, Birmingham, Alabama had something where they turned it into a fun community project, that they had this big, open, blighted, blank piece of ground And they had a local contest as to what should go on that piece of land. And it engaged all age brackets from the oldest to the youngest and in between, and everybody was talking about it. And everybody will forevermore, and I don't know where they ended up on it, but will forevermore identify with that and identify with that process. I think it's also important, to give people voice and access to engagement. And these last little examples that I just gave you are exactly that. And we all know how many people have no voice today. And there are more and more people who are without voice. Remember that even they are paying sales tax. They're keeping your public transit going. They are doing a lot of things. They're the volunteers in our schools and our churches and so forth. Assess those. Money is only one of the issues out there. And I can tell you, again, as I said, we can give all the money in the world and not get any kind of a return. Now, there are two old adages that I think are great, and so you can try these out. Any of you philanthropists in the room who have your pockets zippered shut could listen to this. And then if you want to use this to take home and repeat, one is that hearses do not have luggage racks. And then I'm told there's an old Jewish proverb that says, shrouds have no pockets. And so for a lot of people who would think they are amassing this wealth, and when I read about these people on Wall Street, I think, what are you going to do with all that? How can you possibly spend $250 million a year? I respect that money. I see how hard Peter Kiewit worked for the money that he made, and instead of spending it on himself, he deeded it to society and left it to people like me to spend the way he said in about an 8-page document, and trusted that into the future and for the community. I respect that tremendously, but I always say to the people who ask for the money, it is not an entitlement. Because it's there created in a foundation, and it's supposed to give, very place-based in Omaha and Nebraska, and just because you're a 501c3, that does not mean you are entitled to that money. And like I said, the philanthropy needs to be effective, or if you're the philanthropoid, as I call we who do this, you're creating a burden. You're creating a burden on yourself, a regret, and you're creating a burden on your children, your grandchildren, and everybody else in your town. The other thing I say, and I'm guessing this is true for Lexington as far as philanthropy is concerned and so forth, one of my phrases is, if you think you hear hoofbeats, do not look for the cavalry, because the cavalry is not coming to save you. You have to develop those resources from within. That's what we say here in Omaha. We know we are that giant flyover, and we're not getting things from the outside to help us. And then likewise, and it's not why I wore this jacket today, but I had a law school professor. He was the contracts guy. And he said, if you hear hoofbeats, don't look for zebras. And think that one through. There's a tremendous amount of wisdom there, and there definitely is when it comes to group activity, building consensus, and building a vision. One of the questions I was asked to talk about is, how do you leverage the money that we're talking about? There's a whole list. Public-private partnerships, which Omaha is really good at, getting private money, public money, and quasi-public-private money to work together. Mr. Kiewit used to talk about philanthropy as a three-legged stool, and he wanted to be the third leg in the stool. He said the first leg of the stool has to be that core group who wants that or needs that. Maybe we have a new medical center going in here, cancer center. Maybe that's the university in that case. The second one is their secondary group of constituents, the people who donate to the university, the people who want to see a cancer center, and so forth. And then when you've gotten those two groups assembled, he'd be the third leg and or more private philanthropy. And the reason for that metaphor, a three-legged stool cannot stand unless it has all three of those legs. And again, that's a great visual for us when we're talking about building this kind of consensus and combined activity. Likewise, Mr. Kiewit was smart. When I started working there at the foundation, I thought, this will never work, because all of our grants are matching grants or challenge grants. I can tell you Pete Kiewit gets smarter every day I work there. Brilliant. Because of the way it brings people together, it stimulates things, it helps sets priority. People have to work. When they work for it, they appreciate it, they have ownership of it, they have pride in it, they will maintain it, they will sustain it, and they will support it. Time limits, it may seem like being a little bit of a Dutch uncle, but we put time limits on everything. And if you want it, here's what you have to do, and in this amount of time, or the money comes off the table. That keeps things going, it keeps people's energy up. Another way to leverage is to empower. If you keep everything up here in the committee that's making the decisions, you're not empowering the people who not only need what it is you're trying to decide to do in any kind of an urban revitalization or community re-energizing, but they're the ones who are going to support it. It's very much of a reciprocal thing, so you need to get that empowerment piece and giving people voice into this at the ground level. And to have ownership and sustainability. Catalytic tools that you can use for that: program-related investments, mission-related investments, community equity funds, community development corporations. You can create impact zones. There are all kinds of things that you can do with that, and that philanthropy can uniquely participate in. And I will tell you, excuse me, the ConAgra Riverfront, you heard Chris Kircher speaking earlier, that whole thing could not have happened if the Kiewit Foundation hadn't come in at about the 11th hour, when they just didn't have enough money to move forward with it, and it was an all or nothing thing. And so we put $12.5 million in, but we did it in a program-related investment. We held the first mortgages on it, on all that land, to the dismay, you just heard Clark Lauritsen speak, to the dismay of his father, because First National held the second mortgages. But the First National was willing to do that in order to get the Peter Kiewit Foundation money, because the bank had so much confidence that this was going to work, and there was TIF involved, and then when they revalued the ConAgra buildings that got built there, everything worked together. We've been paid back on our program-related investment 100%, and that ended about 5 years ago. So that gives us money back to completely recycle. First National got their money back. ConAgra's stock price has continued to go up. Everybody's happy. And they have a skating rink on the campus in the wintertime. So that's nice for all of us. Sandy and I share an experience with going way back when Omaha had spent 25 years discussing whether we would build a new convention center arena. 25 years. And we finally, the chamber hired a consultant, a wonderful guy who was Sandy's partner at the time in this business that they shared. And I will always remember what Jack said. He came from Indianapolis, and he was a lawyer in his day job, but he had really helped to create that entire system in Indianapolis of being the capital for amateur sports. And he said to this group of people assembled, and I was there because of my job, but it was some of the, big boys in town. He said, Omaha reminds me a lot of Indianapolis. And everybody kind of sat up straighter in their chairs and squared their shoulders and were so proud. And then he finished his sentence, 25 years ago. He said, you people have a very narrow window of opportunity left. Stick your fist in that window and keep it open until you decide what you're going to do. And if you can't decide, Seattle is tearing down the kingdom in the amount of time that you guys have been spending talking about this. So either get on it or realize, and then you'll never catch up. Well, that soaked in on everybody, and in the end, the Kiewit Foundation, a few months later, offered a $25 million grant. And we said, you got 18 months, Omaha, take it or leave it, no hard feelings, but the money comes off the table. And what the community had to do was pass a bond issue. The business community had to get organized, other philanthropists, some state short-term sunsetting legislation had to occur, and by golly, they crossed the finish line. You can see what's across the street now, and it is one of the busiest, and it has turned out to be one of the most profitable centers balanced off of the arena with local events and the convention center. I told you about Abbott Drive. Creighton University, a combination of Creighton's constituency, the business community, philanthropy, et cetera, helped them buy, 12, 15 blocks of blighted area on the east side of their campus which now all but maybe 2 or 3 of those blocks have been transformed into a vibrant extension of the campus. It's also come closer to downtown. It has given a facelift to many, many blocks of downtown, and it started to help open us up toward that baseball stadium that you see and to some of the areas north of that. But again, without a public-private partnership, that couldn't have occurred. What happened across the street couldn't have occurred. Now, some of the ugly, unpopular things you can also get philanthropoids to do. You saw the Gallup campus coming in. That used to be one of the biggest, nastiest, toxic junkyards in the Midwest. It took $5 million to clean that up. Nothing could happen until it was. Well, we just quietly wrote a check and said, here's $5 million, let's get it cleaned up. Because we had to keep the momentum going. It was fragile, but we had momentum going. And I don't say that to boast, I just say sometimes that's where a philanthropist shows up. We've done a couple of other unpopular things. To give you an example on the social side, it's not community revitalization, but it's community humanity. No one would fund a part-time hospice worker for the Nebraska AIDS Project 20 years ago. No philanthropy, no company, nothing. The Kiewit Foundation stepped up and pledged a lousy $40,000 for a hospice worker. And what was convincing to our trustees was, have you ever known a 6-year-old who has leukemia, who gets AIDS because she had bad blood? AIDS belongs to all of us. And with that, the trustees approved the grant, and every insurance company and a lot of companies in town had jumped on in less than 30 days. And that agency stabilized, grew, and has been able to meet, to a good degree, that population. Same thing with Project Harmony. We had no agency that was really working on child abuse and some of the worst forms of child abuse, and we had a state unfunded mandate come down. Every county had to have one-stop shop for children who were abused sexually, emotionally, physically, in any way you can think of. Nobody wanted to go near that. And there was an attorney in town who told the story of one little girl that she had been the court-appointed lawyer on in a case like that went on for 8 years. That turned the tide on everything, and Project Harmony in Omaha is now the national model for those kinds of child advocacy and care organizations. It was philanthropy that did those kinds of things, taking those unpopular things, giving them voice, putting air and light on them, and making the community realize we own that too. And it's turned what were really uncomfortable issues into points of pride for us and for, again, points of humanity. These things that I'm talking about in Omaha, and there are tons more, and that's the other thing that's cool. You can't tell. I think part of our success, and I would urge you to think about this as you look at your models and your opportunities, you cannot point to any one thing that made the difference in why you came here to visit Omaha. It's not just Abbott Drive. It's not just the riverfront or the Quest Center. It's not Creighton's expansion. It's not Bruce Lauritsen building the First National Bank Tower. It's not the Union Pacific's new headquarters. It's not ConAgra's global headquarters. It's not any one of those one things. You can't say which one happened. And lots of people were on the table playing different roles in all of those different projects. And that, I think, is what has brought so much shared collective pride to us. But there's also, in a Midwestern way, there's a tremendous amount of humility, because everybody realizes nobody could have done any of those things alone or even in a small clique. One other thing that I like to point out in these things is to mix in some fun. If you don't have popularity going on some of these community things at this point, create a few things even if they're small. Get some action going, get some fun going. Community events, public art can do that for you. As I look back over the years, we had 2 incredibly popular, fun, just kind of whimsical public art projects. everybody in town. You could drive around town to find each one of these 50 statues that were all painted differently and had different stories behind them. And scads of school children had this little book. So Mom and Dad were driving everybody all over town to check those off, and it was great. Everybody got to know the community better. All of these sculptures were fun and curious. Everybody got to own the town a little bit more, and it got more of a civic spirit going. And you saw some beautiful areas, and you saw some nasty areas that some people didn't realize existed. You can get your children, who you're really doing this for, and for the generations that come beyond them, get them involved now in philanthropy, in seeing cause and effect, in ownership. Penny drives. Penny drives for children are wildly successful. I know it may sound crazy. And we had one wealthy man in Omaha who said, "You've got to be kidding. Penny drives, we're not going to get much money out of that." That's not the point. It's the ownership, it's the teamwork, it's every child throughout the community can read how many schools had that penny drive, or how many, wherever you decide to place those pennies, and it becomes a cumulative team effort. And again, no one can tell where it stopped. Which penny was the penny that got you to that total? Nobody will ever know. It's every one of those child's pennies. And then the local pride, know your history. You have some phenomenal history in Lexington. We have some phenomenal history too, know that. That adds glamour, it adds personality, and again, it builds the teamwork and the sense of camaraderie in your community. I have seen all of this work. This is not Nebraska corn stuff. The balance for civic philanthropy, there's a disease in the business that I'm in, and it's called the arrogance of philanthropy. It can be terminal. It's because some philanthropists think that because they have money, they know more than other people, and they will try and control everything and dictate from the top. There's a difference between the way Peter Kiewit does matching grants, challenge grants, some of these other things, and the arrogance. We do not presume to know the answers. We listen to the people in the engine room. Right now, I will tell you that 3 of my favorite friends, the people that I most enjoy interacting with in business relations, not the only 3, but is a commercial realtor who's doing all kinds of things for us on a project we're now doing in a blighted part of town, and he's doing it all pro bono. The guy who's the acting director of the city parks, and the man who's the director of public works in Omaha. When we put our heads together, and again, everybody, those guys come to the potluck supper. They put on the table what they can. We put on the table what we can, and we are getting some amazing things done at a fraction of the cost they would take in the marketplace. We couldn't afford to do these things if we were in the competitive market. But by everybody coming to the table, they can all afford each of the things they're doing, and likewise can we. Going back to the arrogance of philanthropy, assuming that the masses will follow a self-proclaimed plan usually isn't going to work. There again, if that guy or gal who's self-proclaiming this is what Lexington needs to do, that could be that elephant in the room. And you need to introduce that elephant, and you need to help the elephant understand that he can't exit the room through the wall. He too has to use the door. And you'll get somewhere on it. One of Omaha's a good philanthropist and very much of a maverick, did his own thing. He's now deceased. We were at a dinner party together one night of about 15 people sitting around this table. And he got up to leave, and I thought he was going to go to the powder room and come back. And if he hadn't come back for quite a while, and he's old enough to be my dad, I said to his wife, you know, Alan has been gone for quite a while. Where is he? And she said, oh, she said, he's home, probably has his slippers on by now. His bullshit alarm went off. That's the first time I'd ever heard of a bullshit alarm. Well, he had been listening to some other rather pompous people at the dinner table who know a lot more about everything than any of us in this room. No. And he just wasn't going to do it anymore. Well, I have found that I think not only does a guy like that have a good BS alarm, but most people do too. Common citizens do. The people who are really working hard all day, every day, they know it when they hear it. Sometimes the alarm doesn't even need to go off for them. And around here, people vote, whether it's in the ballot box or otherwise, they vote with their feet. You won't hear it a lot, but gradually you won't see them turning up. You won't see them participating. They will take their ball and their bat, and they will go home, and they'll start their game in the backyard. So it's another reason for inclusion, practicality, access for all people. There's another proverb that says that money can be a terrible master, but an excellent servant. I love that one. Will your plan meet current and long-term needs? We've touched on that a little bit. Incremental development, don't start at the top. Bruce Lauritsen did not start his whole building plan and resource development by building that tall tower. I could take you through what that progression is. I won't. But the point is that you don't start at the top. You start with that progression. That's also responsible. That's a good business plan. And donors and government will respond to that in kind. Use of consultants, be careful. Shouldn't say that to you, but you and Jack, when you and Jack came, you said, put your fist in the window and keep it open. You were the only ones who could say that. Nobody in town could have said that, and if they had, it would have been a naysayer. But it was somebody who really knew that business. In turn, though, I would say so many consultants, they'll never get the ethos of your community. Probably even if they've lived among you for 3 to 5 years, they won't. They wouldn't here in Omaha. And so what are you getting when you get a consultant? They can sometimes come in and help you frame things. But again, you want to talk to, and you need to talk to, the people in the engine room. And that consultant is never going to get to the engine room. That's not my term. That's John Foster Dulles' term. When they brought him up on the bridge of a huge battleship at some point in the Cold War, with all the guys in suits, the white uniforms with all the stuff, he said to them, I don't want to be up here. I want to talk to the guys in the engine room. And I think that's just a great phrase, because that ship wasn't going to go anywhere. And the nation's defense was not going to be served if the guys in the engine room weren't doing what they could do, should do, wanted to do, and saw their place in all of that. So listen and talk to the guys in the engine room, not the consultants. Okay, back to Wilma. Start. At the end, the middle, or the beginning. It's scary to start, but if you do it, it doesn't matter if you start. And that's the point of the one-word lecture. It doesn't matter where you start. You can start with something small. You can start with something that's an eyesore. You can start with something that's fun. You can start with something that ends up building community identity and spirit, Team Lexington. But the important thing is to start. And when you get into it, that'll lead you to the next place. And pretty soon, you'll see what that plan is. And in the process of doing all of this and having honest, candid, genuine, authentic discussion and driving out fear. W. Edwards Deming said people, and he's the guy, the United States wouldn't listen to with the auto industry, so he went to Japan, and we saw what happened in my Hondas in the garage. But W. Edwards Deming is the guy who said, drive out fear. People cannot do their best work if they're fearful. And I think all of us can find some sort of an experience like that in our life, and can certainly swear to that. And engage. As you start, engage. There are a lot of people in this room who still have children who live at home. That dinner table conversation, find out what they think. What are they interested in? What do they think is cool? What do they think is dumb? Where are their heads going? Those millennials are going to be the decision makers before long. The boomers are the institutional memory, and we need the boomers at the table, because as one of Omaha's biggest philanthropists, wealthiest men, said to me once, you boomers are the institutional memory. He said the people you grew up at the knees of, Depression and World War II, are the people that made this nation great. That's in you. You need to get that stuff out. You need to talk about it, live it, explain it, braid the best of that in with the newest things, or what made American community so great and unique will be gone forever. So you need the boomers. We don't know about the Xers. If there are Xers in here, I apologize, but we're all still trying to figure them out. But the millennials are who we really need to be listening to, and they're showing a very interesting ethos that people didn't think they'd see, but we also have to get them off of this. One of Omaha's top CEOs of an international firm, Tenaska, will often say to people, it's an energy company, and he was the guy who wouldn't work by Enron's ethics, left Enron and started Tenaska, and the rest is history, Midwestern values. And he, when people come into a room, he'll say, leave that thing at the door if somebody's sitting there in a meeting. That's the other thing that I would commend to you, is that issue of civility. There's a wonderful book written by a man who did a 3-year study at Johns Hopkins. I say that because my inferiority complex, if I told you it was done in Omaha, you wouldn't buy the book. But it's a book you can read in an evening, and it's called Choosing Civility. And in my opinion, it's great also for community building. This man, I can't remember his first name, but Dr. Forney, F-O-R-N-I, Choosing Civility. And if you can incorporate that in, for the people in this room, that's second nature. But we need to be teaching that to our young people. And so a reminder for all of us after reading that book, it's reminded me of a lot of things that my husband and I need to talk to our 18-year-old about. We know all those things, that's the way we grew up. But a lot of those things are gone now. We can't assume that a lot of these teamwork things and the maturity to compromise and stay at the table and be able to talk to each other eyeball to eyeball instead of thinking we're going to do this up and down the hall. And then the other thing that I love to say to people is to give thanks. I cannot tell you how many times no one ever says thanks for a Kiewit Foundation grant. It can be $10 million. It can be $250,000. The ones we hear the thanks from the most are usually the ones that are under $25,000. We don't even get a postcard, or in this day and age, an email, saying thank you for some of those biggest things. We do not want crystal bowls. We don't want brass plaques. We don't want those kinds of things. Just say thanks. And I would guess to a philanthropist in your town, especially one of a certain age, they would be uncomfortable with much more than that. But that really matters, and it matters because they'll give again. And it matters because how they're going to talk about how it felt to give. All this stuff that we've been talking about may sound soft to you, but having done this for 30 years, I can tell you, I've seen all the hard edges in it too. I've seen the financials, all the accounting from my friend the CPA, all the things the lawyers have to do, all the things, statutes, ordinances, that we all have to work with in order to get these things done. But that's all possible. Everybody works together, and everybody's invited to the potluck supper. And the last thing I'm going to tell you is Woodrow Wilson. We all know who Woodrow was. He said this to an audience of his students at Princeton University who were graduating. He said, "You are not here merely to make a living. You are here to enable the world to live more amply, with greater vision, with a finer spirit of hope and achievement. You are here to enrich the world, and you impoverish yourself if you forget the errand." I think that is wonderful because it does speak to each one of us and what we will realize out of it. It's like Sir Cecil Rhodes, the one question you have to ask a Rhodes Scholar applicant is, what are you doing to fight the world's fight? And that candidate has to answer that question. You might ask yourself that, maybe not ask your friends in Lexington, but that's a good thing. And then finally, you know, Athens and those Greeks did something right. And if any of you, I mean, we've all been there, the buildings are still standing and so forth. But the oath of the Athenian citizen is very applicable to what we've been talking about here today, whether it's Omaha or it's Lexington. And that oath is, we will unceasingly seek to quicken the sense of public duty. We will transmit this city not only, not less, but greater, better, and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. So again, we're standing on the shoulders just like the Athenians are, and they are building on what we all know they have, and we are trying to do that in Omaha and in Lexington. Now, we invite you to come back. I've only been to Lexington twice. One was in 1963, and one was in 1974. And that was because my cousin and his wife were doing residencies at the university, and we hardly ever saw them, but we got to see a lot of the town. And then the last thing I want to say, my friend Christine Johnson, who was up here in the last panel, said that there is an organization that she would commend to all of you, and she neglected to mention it during her remarks, and it's called the ACCP. And it's the Association of Corporate Contribution Professionals. And Christine is on that board in her capacity at the Mutual of Omaha Foundation. And so ACCP, Association of Corporate Contribution Professionals. So with that, if there's time, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, except I will not tell you my shoe size.
I can guess. First of all, I want to, following her cue, let's please say thank you to Lyn.
Oh,
Lyn, thank
my
you.
pleasure.
Lyn, thank you for being here, for sharing so much of your own history and those that you have garnered from others over the years. Very important for us all to learn. As we get forward with some Q&A, just want to give you a few statistics. Ranking out of the 366 metro areas in the U.S., Lexington ranks 94th in giving, and Omaha ranks 53rd in giving. I thought that was interesting. You can find these statistics. We are actually incredibly similar as communities in our giving levels. Percentage of income given, 5.1% in Lexington, 4.2% in Omaha. We have a very strong demographic comparisons as far as age breakdown. I think it's also very interesting to look at the community foundations. I don't want to call them community foundations. I guess just charitable foundations. We have quite a few in Kentucky. Omaha has a zillion more. So I think it's just been, and their assets are comparable as well. I heard so many things in what you said. Know your history. We need to use real, clear lines of reality when we're looking, and use collective memory. With that, I would really like to open this up for questions from what you heard Lyn say, from what you know about our own collaborative environment in giving, and let's hear what you have to say. So, oh, I'm sorry, there are here microphones, and if you're going to be on this side, I'll give mine up.
Thank you, Sandy. Lyn, thank you very much. My wife and I are both in fundraising, and we don't have a lot of friends in the room because of that. But a couple of things that we try to focus on is impact. And, you know, one of the things that you talk about effectiveness, you know, thanking donors, we focus on impact. If we raise a gift, for example, we just put digital mammography in one of our hospitals in a small rural community in central Kentucky. And we are probably going to see over 10,000 patients in the next 10 years for that. The impact of that gift is so important. And I think using the statistics, we're probably going to save about 400 lives in Jessamine County alone by doing that. Do you emphasize impact for when you go to donors and you talk about giving, and do you emphasize the impact that gift is going to have on the quality of life for the people that you serve? And one other thing I wanted to mention too is stewardship. You know, stewardship is becoming so much more important because there are several nonprofit directors in here today and wonderful organizations, but at the end of the day, why give to us instead of them? And I think that stewardship is becoming much more important because donors are a lot more smarter than they've ever been before. And they look at costs, they look at fundraising costs, they look at administrative expenses as well. And do you emphasize the stewardship and the impact when you go out and seek donors as well?
How about this? It depends. I said it depends. It depends upon what the category of giving is. We're not raising money, we're giving money. But we're also looking at who the other donors are, et cetera. We will usually look at what the impact is. But one of the things that's a problem is you're either funding people to do what it is they're doing, or you're asking them to take on another burden administratively of keeping all the stats and all the calculations. And so what do you want them really doing? You want them out there doing more mammograms in this case. So they can give you, and you can project when you're asking a potential donor, you can project based on population, age, et cetera. And then we also know statistically how to compute when you save a woman from breast cancer, what those costs to the family are that never occur, and what the workforce remains because of her, and so forth. And you can list all those, and when you say a donor is becoming more and more savvy, to a great degree, all you need to do are list what are all those positives if they donate to this. So that's one issue. The other thing is that I think that there's a balance there between what I call this arrogance of philanthropy and giving. Is we would say to the boys club, you know your business best. Far be it from us to judge what's effective with inner city fatherless boys between the ages of 9 and 14. You know best. You tell us what you need, why you need that, how you're going to use it, and then we see how that fits into our program. And then likewise, when we're doing some of these big, gigantic urban things, and I will tell you, our grants range in size from $395 to $25 million and everything in between. And we've given away $550 million in my 30 years, and the foundation's been there 32, so that kind of helps you frame things. But, and now I forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry about framing us. But, the arrogance of philanthropy. For us to judge on that basis, who is that? Who are we to tell them that it's good enough or it isn't? Again, we want to talk to the people in the engine room because they know their business best. And from the stewardship standpoint, you can judge that by what the organization's history is, what its reputation is in the community, and so forth. And so, and I remember this was another aspect, when we're going out to talk to peers, like a Mike Faust, who you heard a little while ago, or a Clark Lauritsen, or a Christine Johnson at Mutual, and we're embarking on a community project and we hope they're going to join us, we'll tell them all of these things, the good, the bad, and the ugly, why we decided to initiate this, what we see as the issue, who has come to talk to us, who's powerless economically, but who sees the need and would be the users and create the beneficiaries of the whole effort. And that's how we end up building some of these public-private partnerships. So each one has its own combination. That's what's kind of fun, because there is no, grid for any of that. And when you say your friends don't like to see you coming, I will tell you that when I'm in the grocery store, I know why half of the people say hello to me. And the day I forget that, it's the day I better quit the job. They're wonderful people, all of them, but I always say, don't lobby in the lettuce. If you're a fundraiser, call me at the office. But so we share an issue on that.
There's another one to write down: no lobbying in the lettuce. That's good.
In soliciting donations for the less popular things, like you mentioned the AIDS clinic, how do you balance showing a real need without stigmatizing the people who are receiving those donations?
I think you explain what the effects of that, not unlike this mammogram issue, it's on a different scale, but you explain what those issues are, you explain what the social cost to it is, and I think you talk a little bit about the humanity of your community. How do we treat each other? I think some of those are much more difficult than others. I think that's easy, well, not easy, none of it's easy, but it's easy to do on hunger. It's easy to do on child issues. There's some that's easy to do on housing, especially when it deals with families. But I think, too, you always have to be careful on some of those issues when you're doing things for the needy, why those people are needy, and how that may compare, even if it's an issue of scale, of how hard the philanthropist worked in their life to make the money versus what you're dealing with. I think you have to look at all of that. Does that answer your question? Yeah. But I think just explaining the numbers and explaining the effects, and then the numbers have to work. Sometimes when it's so onerous, we throw the balance out the window, and those two would be examples of that I gave you. On others that are not quite, that don't make the public so uncomfortable, like homelessness and hunger, as they do incest and 6-year-old leukemia victims with AIDS, then it's a little bit of a different thing. But we throw out, if we want to get the attention of everybody and legitimize something, we throw out the rules and come forward and take a stand. And because people know us, it makes them more comfortable to give.
Please go ahead.
Allison Lankford with the Bluegrass Community Foundation. And I guess I have kind of a comment and a question tied to it. One of the statistics we just heard was that, Lexington comparatively has much less in terms of private foundations and private foundation dollars in philanthropy. And although, I think we all wish we could wave our wand and that happened, we don't have as much control over that. But I wanted to point out that something the state of Kentucky has done, I think, to change that, and something that Brandon Smith actually was a real leader on, so thank you, Brandon, was the Endowed Kentucky tax credits. And so that is to really try to create more permanent charitable resources in Kentucky and in Lexington, which is just an incredible opportunity for us to do that, for individuals to get tax credits for contributing to permanent endowments, to try to grow that in communities. I think Louisville is one of the few communities in Kentucky that has more private foundations. So I just wondered if you all make that comment, but then also if Nebraska has done anything similar and how that is taken off.
We have. There's a cultural endowment that's done on a little bit of that basis based upon contributions to it. The legislature lets forth a certain amount of money to do it. Back when we were hoping to keep ConAgra in Omaha and not move to Memphis as they were threatening to do, there was legislation passed that was pretty specific to solving that issue. But in so doing, it was, well, we can't do this for one company, and that's just not good public policy. So there were other aspects of it that were broadened to benefit other kinds of industry, whether it was industry currently here in the state or that we were trying to attract. The other issue, though, with that for us in Nebraska is when we get legislative stuff that would affect all 93 counties, inherently we have this east-west urban-rural issue, and that affects an awfully lot of things. Everything's relationship based, and we all know that in the end, and that people give money to people in this whole philanthropy thing, and who do you trust in a fundraiser or in an organization that's doing things. And at a certain point, when it's the people to people part, it falls apart in a state like Nebraska because it's not equitable. We have the same problem on school funding. So depending upon what the actual structure would be of something like that and how it benefits and on what scale would be a big issue for us here. Most of the people in the state, and I don't blame them, would say Omaha doesn't need any more. We're hemorrhaging out here in ag land and keeping our towns and our agencies and all going. We need more help. And I couldn't argue with that. We have mass and they don't. So The other thing I think is when, in the end, that's government. Yes, it's tax credits and all, but it's temporary, and you're not really changing life patterns or values, that sort of a thing. And so while that could be a component, if a community becomes dependent or reliant upon that and thinks we can do that, then you're not getting this issue of personal philanthropy, of everybody here, time, talent, or treasure, in coming to the potluck supper. Now, I understand you talked about the restaurant tax earlier, and that is something that has been extremely controversial here, because to some extent it goes on class lines too. So, does that answer your question? Sort of.
Lynn, again, thank you very much. I think we are challenged both by the corporate panel we had before, who talked a lot about how their presence here has to do with how they're giving back to the community, plus Lynn's important message about how we incorporate that and be involved in that and make sure there are voices everywhere. I think the number one thing I'm taking away from this is start. So thank you very much, Lyn.
My pleasure.